Hello, everybody. We're going to get started in a few minutes, so go ahead and get settled. Unlike the last time I did this, when I had a book with LSU Press back in 2020, I can't see anybody this time, which is maybe a good thing. But I will be able to take questions at the end, so that'll be fun. So go ahead and make yourself comfortable, and we'll get started in just a couple of minutes, okay? This is my study, and we may get photobombed by a cat or a dog at some point during this session. Okay, it's about 3 minutes after. Let's get started. I'm Julie Kane, and I'm going to be reading today from my new book, Naked Ladies, New and Selected Poems, just out from LSU Press. This book gathers what I hope are the best poems from my 5 previous books of poetry, plus there's a good-sized chunk of new poems at the end of it. So I thought what I'd do today is maybe read about 2 poems from each of the 5 sections from previous books, and then maybe read 3 or 4 poems from the new section, if that sounds good. And then at the end, we're going to have a little Q&A. So I'll start with poems from my very first book, Body and Soul, and I'll begin with what's probably the oldest poem in the book, The Good Women. I remember writing it when I was a junior in college and my grandfather died. And it's about if you've ever felt as if you look so much like your parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles, but you feel so very different on the inside from them. That's what this poem is about. The Good Women. 3 out of 4 are named Mary, these good Irish women who surface at wakes like earthworms after rain. Death makes them bake turkeys, casseroles, applesauce cakes. They breathe the thick incense of flowers for strength, dispense prayers like milk from each massive breast. Black becomes them. Red-haired, broad-hipped for easy babies, I stand among them, betrayer of my race. I, whose God bless yous have no authority behind them, am awkward as the corpse in this army of grace. And the other one I'll read from my first book, it's called Prayer to Chaos. And I know some of you know that I can read palms. I actually did it professionally at events in the French Quarter to help pay for graduate school. But in palmistry, your non-dominant hand is kind of like your fate, your inherited traits, and your dominant hand shows kind of like how you can change your fate through the choices that you make. You can actually, through your own good choices, change some of the bad stuff. So anyhow, the intro is now longer than the poem. This is Prayer to Chaos. Let the universe be random. Let no choreographer impose design on the dance of atoms. Let the stars' prophecies, the old dead light, skew past our lives. If the lines on the palms of our hands be life charts, let them swerve like rivers when we touch. No, not touch, collide. And then moving to my book, second book, Rhythm and Booze. And to go with the title, I will begin with maraschino cherries. There was a lot of drinking in my Irish American family, and my dad's favorite drink was the Manhattan, which has a maraschino cherry in it. And my two younger sisters and I always had to get a maraschino cherry, which meant that he had to drink Manhattans in multiples of 3, to be fair. This is maraschino cherries. 3 little girls on the morning after, out in the kitchen, poking around for cherries soaked in whiskey like a bomb of grown-up secrets. Other times we found by mom's clipped earrings and kicked off shoes, blue glass monkeys on swizzle sticks, doll-sized oriental parasols, cocktail napkins with jokes we didn't get, cherries as precious as Burmese rubies. Once in a while the grown-ups slept, we ate our fill of cherries from the jar, but even then we liked the booze ones best. And continuing that obsession with alcohol into middle age, this is a villanelle called Kissing the Bartender. It's kind of about how puppy love can strike you at any age. The summer we kissed across the bar, I felt 16 at 36. As if you were a movie star I had a crush on from afar. My chest was flat, my legs were sticks the summer we kissed across the bar. Balancing on the rail was hard. Spilled beer made my elbows stick. You could have been a movie star, backlit, golden, lofting a jar of juice or Bloody Mary mix the summer we kissed across the bar. Over the sink, the limes, as far as you could lean, you leaned. I kissed the movie screen, a movie star. Drinks stayed empty, ashtrays tarred. The customers got mighty pissed the summer we kissed across the bar. Summer went by like a shooting star. And then moving to Jazz Funeral, a collection of mostly, I guess, all sonnets. This is a poem about my late father, who was, when I was younger, a TV newscaster, and later in life, he moved over to radio news. And when I was little, I couldn't understand how he fit inside the TV when I saw him on there. It's also about how if you've ever lost a loved one and then something really awful happens in the news and you think, even though you grieve them every day and wish they were still here, you think, oh, thank God they're not here to see that. It would break their hearts. And that's what this is about. Death of a Newsman, in memoriam, Edwin Julian Kane. The night sky is bright with the grieving Pleiades. Rising in the season, your voice was stilled at last. Though sound itself never dies, your every newscast spiraling out through space to distant galaxies. When I was little, I thought you knelt in TVs. I walked around them looking for a door and latch. Heads jerked in swordfish netted restaurants when you asked for a menu. Women sent you cold remedies. News of the ancient gods precedes your voice through space. Bulletins about rapists and transformations. Sisters scattered to stars, riding on waves of sound. Briefly, your news of protests, assassinations. Then, in the wake of your inimitable base, towers struck and destroyed, a much loved city drowned. And I'll read another one. If I make it to June 2026, that will make 50 years that I've been living in Louisiana, but I'm originally from Boston. My family's all from around Boston. And this poem has the Red Sox in it, particle physics. And I hope the physics is right. Any physicists out there? Okay. They say two photons fired through a slit stay paired together to the end of time. If one is polarized to change its spin, the other does a U-turn on a dime. Although they fly apart at speeds of light and never cross each other's paths again, like us, a couple in the 70s, divorced for almost 30 years since then. Tonight, a Red Sox batter homered twice to beat the Yankees in their playoff match. And sure as I was born in Boston, when that second ball deflected off the bat, I knew your thoughts were flying back to me, though your location was a mystery. After that book, Jazz Funeral, which was, about Hurricane Katrina, my dad's death, the death of several friends, the breakup of a long-time relationship, I just started writing silly poems to kind of make myself laugh. And that's what led to my, I guess, fourth book, Paper Bullets. And I'm going to read a little sequence of three very short poems called Emily, Walt, and Edna Rewrite Heartbreak Hotel. I'm sure you've all heard the Elvis Presley song, Heartbreak Hotel. Remember it at the end of Lonely Street. They're always pretty full, but they always have room for broken-hearted lovers crying in the gloom. The desk clerk is dressed in black. The bellhop is always crying. Anyhow, I'd sing it if, if you could stand it, but just a reminder. I saw somewhere an ad, a newspaper in London was having a contest for rewriting a famous song in the voice of a well-known poet. So I started with Emily Dickinson, and then I kind of couldn't stop. I had to do Walt Whitman and Edna St. Vincent Millay. So this is Emily, Walt, and Edna Rewrite Heartbreak Hotel. Emily, 'tis down the street called Lonely, that guest house where I dwell. The bellhop's tears keep flowing. The guests have tales to tell. Eons since baby left me to desk clerks garbed in black, and I surmised the lodger's eyes weren't ever looking back. Lots of M dashes in it if you look at it on the page. And this is Walt. I saw at the end of Lonely Street with tear-filled orbs, I marked it, saw the mournful hotel called Heartbreak, the lodge of the forsaken. And I knew that though it contained multitudes, I could always find a room there. And I knew that it was a dwelling place for broken-hearted lovers, the bellhops weeping and moaning, and I longing to comfort them, to part the jet cloth from their bosom bones and thrust my rude tongue athwart them. And then we get to Edna St. Vincent Millay, who of course is not the heartbroken one, but the one causing the heartbreak. And her little part goes, I shan't be checking into that hotel, although some say there is a vacancy. The somber occupants have tales to tell, and fain would blame their broken hearts on me. Awake, I've lain in every numbered room, beside a husband of a single night, who can do naught but weep away his gloom midst clerks in garments colored anthracite. Ask not why death forsakes this mournful inn, whose lodgers grieve for my ephemeral charms, nor why I jilted them to lie in sin each weeknight in a different pair of arms. Believe that ardor drew me to each man, but baby's got a short attention span. Okay. And I'll move on from that silly book to Mothers of Ireland, my last book before this one, and also my first book with LSU Press. I'll read a couple of villanelles from that form that I really love. And if you have mother issues, maybe this will resonate with you. This is whore. What kind of mother calls her daughter whore when she finds out her daughter's fiance is moving in a couple months before the wedding? Small town priggish to her core, smug priest who slams shut the confessional grate. That kind of mother calls her daughter whore. Yet, when that husband battered down a door, came crashing through a bookshelf barricade, the daughter phoned her mother just before instead of the police or friends. What for? The mother snapped, "Oh, don't exaggerate." The phone line crackled with the unsaid whore. The daughter crumbled after the divorce. She slept around as if each drunken lay could blot out all the ugliness before. So many men that she could not keep score. They cradled her, if only till they came. Once you have heard your mother call you whore, you might as well be if you weren't before. And this is, I dreamed of being mothered by a cat. I dreamed of being mothered by a cat, sunk in her plush as in a feather bed. I'd never known a happiness like that. My human mother's claws would not retract. Even her language could unzip or read. I dreamed of being mothered by a cat who'd give her life to save me from attack. I sensed that fierceness in her as I fed. I'd never known a happiness like that. If there were siblings, I ignored that fact. I had her to myself, or I forget the whole time I was mothered by a cat. One dream can strike you like a thunderclap. That mother cat, more goddess than a pet. I'd never known a happiness like that. The world was pure sensation, not abstract, some realm between the living and the dead. I dreamed of being mothered by a cat, and something healed inside me after that. And then moving to the new and previously uncollected sections of the book, which is kind of scary because I really don't know if these are any good. I guess I'll find out once I start hearing back from people. I'm going to start out. I have never read this poem before. I've never published it before this book came out, but I'll read it. It's got a mother in it. Lemon meringue pie. My mother was baking a lemon meringue pie when the phone call came that her mother had died. Glossy yellow filling cooling in its tin on that laminate counter with the boomerang print. I was her kitchen helper, 11 years old. I was beating raw egg whites in a wobbly metal bowl. Who in their right mind would link death to a pie? Served with it for dessert, I still push it aside. Is it just poets who have associative memories like that, who refuse to eat pie because of something that happened, like millions of years ago? I don't know. I'll read a few more from the new section and then take questions. This is Ruby Red Opal GT. And if you're like me, probably the first car you ever owned had a name, and no car has ever been the same as that first one, even though that car was pretty terrible. Ruby Red Opal GT. Your car is new. It has AC. The engine's under warranty, and yet your heart's unmoved as stone. You dream of one you used to own, which, like a pet, acquired a name. Ruby, her color red as flame, the hue your mom warned not to wear because it clashed with your flaming hair. Her headlight eyes were lidded shut, recessed in the hood till a lever was tugged in hard reverse. So cool, so what in the moonless dark if it sometimes stuck? And what if she wasn't built to stop? Idling too long caused vapor lock, the engine flooded. She loved to go, and when she wouldn't, some night would show and give her a push. You were pretty then, your body unmarred by nicks and dents. Now that Sir Galahads are few, a AAA card rescues you when in distress. A punctured tread, the worst malfunction one might dread. But in the past, a cloud of steam pours from a hood as if a dream, your flame red roadster running hot, and you relearn what you forgot, driving in comfort with a spare. Risk was the road to everywhere. This is all right. I'm going to find Across a Crowded Room, Pantoum. If you think you hear lines repeating, you are. Okay. It's the fault of those Broadway musicals on my mother's hi-fi that I half expected my fellow drunks to burst into song. Cue Some Enchanted Evening from South Pacific, the night you walked into the room at my AA home group. I half expected my fellow drunks to burst into song while an orchestra rose from the church basement floor, the night you walked into the room at my AA home group. Love at first sight may just be remembering the future. A tall, skinny, black-haired man walks into a church basement and time stops, a heart stops, a mouth drops open. Love at first sight may just be remembering the birth room someone imprinted on us before we were conscious. Time stops, a heart stops, a mouth drops open. Once in every musical, that show-stopping moment when rationality yields to the pull of the unconscious. I was raised on Broadway musicals from my mother's hi-fi. And this poem, next to last one I'll read, is called Noodler. And if you have or had a loved one suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's, you can probably identify with this one. I was happy all day today because you called me Noodler, pulling that pet name out of the depths of memory. Sometimes in our brief phone calls, I can't help but wonder if you know who I am, or if it's like Chat GPT. My late mom was the only one who called me Wooey. A late boss was the only one who called me Fox. They took those pet names with them to the cemetery, but you'll probably still be alive when Nuller is lost. In that fairy tale with the maid spinning straw into gold, Rumpelstiltskin disappears when she utters this secret name. But I think they got it backward so very long ago. What did the brothers Grimm really know about pain? Some part of us does disappear when a magic spell is broken, but it happens when a secret name stops being spoken. And since it's almost Mardi Gras, I'll end with every Mardi Gras day. Okay. A sonnet. Every Mardi Gras day, we would go to that stiff party thrown by a member of the Landrew family, not sweet Mayor Moon, who had integrated the city, but the one with a gun shop in Kenner or Metairie. We'd stand on our feet for hours on the roped off lawn, a hired security guard ejecting would-be crashers as Rex lumbered by with its dewy debutante queen and paunchy businessman king as old as her father. I'd get my revenge at the poetry readings you'd sit through confused but gallantly polite. Your uptown friends were appalled at my lack of proper reading. My poet friends were convinced you were not too bright. Not even I believed that we would last this long, but if ever I ceased to love was Rex's song. Thank you. And I'm going to take questions in a minute or two. Once Sunny Rosen from LSU Press, I guess, checks the chat.
Thank you. Yep, I've got our first question here. Our first question is from Catherine. It's about your writing process. Can you talk a little more about what that looks like? So, how long does it take you to write a poem? Do you go back and revise a lot? How do you know when it's finished, right? What does that process look like? And
Oh,
also,
good.
do you devote a certain amount of time to writing each day?
Oh, I do not write every day, and I do not recommend following my example because, whenever I have had prose projects and nonfiction book articles, my dissertation, I had to map out a block of time every day. And I know I would have many more, keeper poems if I did that. So don't do what I do in that respect. I tend to write when I'm really is the word inspired, when a subject is really nagging at me and kind of, forcing me to sit down, and write the poem. And until recently, I wrote poems in longhand, and I tend to revise heavily as I'm writing. I will keep editing, changing every line or every two lines, as I go, so that when I get to the end of that first draft, I've already done a lot of revision along the way. Then usually, I'm sure other poets can identify with this. When you've just finished a poem, you think, wow, it's like having a new baby. You want to count its little fingers and toes, you're happy. And then you put it aside and you go back, a week later and you look at it like, like at that point, I can't make any major changes to the poem. I can't like totally rewrite it or, anything like that. But that's the point at which I can tweak it, where I can change a line, change words, change a line, change the title, do stuff like that. So I do recommend revising your poems, but don't follow me in waiting too long to actually write them.
Thank you. Our next question is from Cindy. Question says, in reviewing Paper Bullets, A.E. Stallings wondered if there was a bestiary in your future, given your poems about animals like egrets and Dead Armadillo Song. Do you think a bestiary is a possibility?
Oh, that's a funny, yeah, what a funny, yeah, a funny thing to notice about that article. That's great. You know, strangely enough, one of the poems I've written most recently is about all the cats I've owned in my life. I guess it's like a bestiary of my cats, but it's in the form of if I say it right, pachuchka. Pachuchka. It's a Japanese form that originated as a business presentation. You know, people were getting really bored with PowerPoint presentations and business meetings, so they came up with this form where you had to have only 20 slides and they each one had an image on it and each one had to take no more than 20 seconds, you know, the text for it. So a few people like Terrence Hayes, Erica Reed, poets have actually written poems in that form. And I decided to do one with all the cats I've ever had. I had to actually leave a couple of cats out because it turned out that even counting ones, you know, outdoor cats that I fed, I had more than 20. But I guess that's the beginnings of my bestiary. Maybe there will be more. Who knows?
Thank you. Our next question is about some of the formal choices that you make. This comes up often with our poets, the question of sort of to rhyme or not to rhyme. So,
Yeah.
a lot of contemporary poets seem to have sort of abandoned rhyme, and then others still do incorporate it in their work. So, how do you make the decision of when to incorporate rhyme as a formal element into your poems, and sort of how do you feel about it as a tool or a device that some poets maybe have abandoned?
Oh, good question. You know, when I began writing in adolescence and high school, of course, you know, I only knew of poets like Robert Frost and de St. Vincent Millay, so I rhymed. And then when I got to college and started taking creative writing classes, like, you know, like oh no, it's old fashioned, you know. It's anything said back then. It was like coming to class in a bus, you know, a bustle and high button shoes. You just did not rhyme. So I quickly abandoned it, you know, and wrote free verse all through my 20s and early 30s. But I've always loved poems that are for the ear, that are to be heard, you know, not just read with the brain and the intelligence, but you know, heard with the ears, you know, with the body. And you know, I was raised like that poem, My Mother's Hi-Fi, you know, raised in a family that sang old Irish songs and show tunes around the piano. I loved the rhyming lyrics. You know, I loved rhyming song lyrics and Bob Dylan and Joni Mitchell. So in my 30s, I started kind of secretly creeping back to rhyme, you know, writing things that I thought were just for myself. And then, to my astonishment, I found out that suddenly there was a whole movement, you know, actually international, not just in the US, of poets who were doing the same thing. They were calling it the new formalist movement, but you know, A.E. Stallings is certainly one of them. You know, Molly Peacock, David Mason, all, you know, all kinds of wonderful poets. And there was a conference going on, the Westchester Poetry Conference on Form and Narrative, you know, that got hundreds of people coming every year. So suddenly it was, you know, it was acceptable to do it again. And I did that, you know, for, again, for a number of years. I really loved, you know, writing, the freedom to go back to it. But with my newer poems, and to a certain extent, some of the poems in my last book too, you know, again, if you do anything too long, you start wanting a challenge. And I got a little tired of, you know, trying to find that rhyme word that fits the meaning. And I still like to have some kind of form as a challenge, you know, as a challenge to work against. So I've been more drawn to forms like the Pantoon, the sestina, um, as I just as I just said, the pachuchka, where you have some kind of structure, but you know, the golden shovel, the duplex, invented by, you know, very recently by Jericho Brown, where you don't have to rhyme, you don't have to worry about meter, but you do have some kind of constraints that it's fun to work against.
Thank you so much. I think that's such a universal experience of, growing up with rhyme and then taking your first poetry class and saying, "Oh no, maybe people don't like this anymore." So
You
that's
too,
great.
you too.
Yeah. Okay, our next question is from Titus. He says, "Hello, Dr. Kane. Enjoyed meeting you at NSU earlier this week." And also says, "I'm talking to people to try and get you to speak at LSUA next semester. Question is, can you talk more about your experience of being published? How does one get a poetry collection published by a major press? And how long does that process take?"
Oh, wow. Yeah. You have to kind of start out publishing in journals, really, before you reach the point where you're going to, actually publish a book, unless you're talking about self-publishing, which is another story. But you have to really also, I think, read journals, be interested not only in writing poems, but in reading other people's poems. But, start start reading journals online or subscribing to things that send you a poem a day, like, the Rattle magazine poem a day. Academy of American Poets, has a daily poem feature. There are several of them out there. Um, get a feel for contemporary poetry. Start looking into literary magazines. Start, go to your library and see what they have. You know, read the acknowledgments section of books by your favorite poets to see what magazines, journals they were published in before their book came out. And then, start submitting your work to journals. It's often good to start with, if there are regional journals, in your location where you can actually, meet the editor. If you talk to, editors at a conference, like Associated Writers and Writing Programs, go up to them in the book fair and talk to them. If you strike up a personal connection when you're just starting out, that's good. But, once you start publishing in journals, it's kind of like, once you get that first poem or two published, then you can mention that in your little cover note when you're submitting again, and every little bit helps you. And when you finally get to the point of getting, being ready for a collection to get published, it is not easy. You would think, because there's almost no money in poetry, unlike fiction, that it would be a lot easier to get published. But even poets who have published, at least one book with a good press often have to start over from scratch with that next book. It can be like a lottery. There are a lot of very reputable contests, whose grand prize is usually a little bit, little check and publication of your book. It's really, it's wonderful if you enter and win one of those. It could be kind of like the lottery, because there are a lot of people trying that. And again, you can always, if you feel an affinity with the books coming out of a particular press, you can always write, look up who that acquisitions editor is, write them a query letter. But again, it's good to have, it's good to have that journal publication experience behind you, good solid track record before you reach that point. And good luck.
Thank you. Our next question is from Shelley. It says, "I've noticed you write about mothers and your own mother often. Do you think we ever exhaust a particular theme, or is there value in continuing to write about and attempting to get to the heart of a particular story?"
Oh, in my case, I don't think I will ever exhaust that theme. I I don't know how it is with other people, but I guess when I look at the poets that, that I really admire, often they keep reworking the same themes throughout their lives, looking at them from different vantage points in life, from, different perspectives. Um, yeah, my mother, bless her heart, she was Gee, I wouldn't be here if not for my mother. She taught me to read, when I was about, 4 years old. She wanted to be a writer herself. She published a few little short stories, but she didn't feel comfortable exposing anything personal, called it hanging your dirty laundry out there. So she never really pushed herself. to publish. In many ways, I'm so lucky to have had her for my mother, but also she was she was a character. So whatever your themes are, um, you know, don't feel as if because you've written one poem or two poems about them that you have to go on to something else. I think some of our very best poets do not follow that that advice, and we're the better for it.
Thank you. Speaking of sort of airing your dirty laundry, quote unquote, how do you handle the autobiographical elements of your work and the times in which you sort of want to make it clear maybe that you're writing from your personal experience versus maybe the I in a poem isn't you, right? There's that question of should we always assume that the I in a poem speaker is the poet? Well, most people would say no. But then how do you sort of reckon with the fact that a reader might still think that the I is always you, right? And how much you want to sort of reveal about yourself, your family, your life.
Oh, good question. Back when I was teaching sophomore literature courses, I would stress that, the poet and the speaker of the poem are two different people. Don't say the poet says this or the poet thinks this. The speaker is different. But, I really write in the tradition of women confessional poets, Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton, who was my teacher at Boston University. Um, and those poets did draw heavily on their own life experiences in their poems. I do too. Probably, maybe 95, 92, 95%, of what's in my poems is drawn from life. But the poet Martha Vertrees once said, but then you have to turn the volume up. So sometimes you have to turn the volume up a little bit. And also sometimes I find myself tweaking details in poems because it makes more sense to a reader, than what is there. Sometimes you kind of have to be true to the poem and not to the real life experience. One example I didn't read, I have a poem called 13 about the summer. Again, my mother, the summer my mother was in the hospital for the entire summer. My sisters and I were staying at our aunt's house, and all summer we would be up in my aunt's attic playing dress up in her old ball gowns and costume jewelry. And in the poem, my first draft, I'm in my aunt's attic, and then it's like it makes more sense to have me dressing up in my mother's clothes, not my aunt's. So, I had to change that for the poem to make it more true, if that fits. But again, and in my funny poems, those are wildly exaggerated, but still there's usually a grain of truth at the root of it.
Thank you. Our next question is, what are you working on now or next? What are you thinking your next project will look like? Obviously, the process of putting poems together for a new and selected is a unique one. So, sort of, what do you do after you've put together a new and selected? What are you thinking of next?
Good question, because I really feel as if this book is a career milestone, if not a tombstone. And what I've been working on, I've been working on a collection, what I hope is going to be a collection of memoir essays about interesting characters that I've known. Anne Sexton and John Cheever will be in there, some New Orleans characters, some poet characters that I've known as well. And I think, that's probably about 3/4 of the way written. And, working on poems here and there. I'm in the middle of another Pachuchka. And who knows? I never know. With poems, I never really know what the next one is going to be about. They tend to surprise me, so who knows?
Thank you. Well, that is our last question, so we can go ahead and say thank you and goodbye to the audience.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for turning out today. And I think if you're interested in getting the book, Naked Ladies, I believe there's going to be a link in the comments under the recording on the LSU Press Facebook page. And I believe Sunny told me there's like a one-time only today, or one-time only 40% discount if you order it through that link. Correct me if I'm wrong,
That's
Sunny.
right.
Oh yeah, yeah. So go for it. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good amount saved. Thank you again so much, and I hope you enjoyed the poems. Thank you.